Sensitivity is important when we're working with people. People want to be heard. People want to be seen. People want to be touched. People want to just really be celebrated, be noticed. So imagine if when they speak, we listen with no judgment, but simply the idea or the understanding that what they're sharing is their truth, their narrative. It could improve our communication in terms of respectful communication. It could improve our understanding of what the narrative may be for this individual. And finally, it can help us identify the origin of the harm. As I work with people who are incarcerated, I could see that they didn't get there by coincidence. For the most part, and I finish with this, for the most part, they normalize trauma, and normalization of trauma has a ripple effect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Everyone, I'm here to talk to you about book clubs that occur in California prisons. So this is a quote from someone who was in one of the book clubs, and it's called, "This book club brings me life. Prison book clubs and community building through collective reading and writing." And this is a picture of our book club, and we got permission to share this with you today. Okay, can you please change the slide? Could you move the slide over so that they can see the writing, please? Okay, so today's talk, I wanted to share with you some of the work that I've been doing in the California prisons. We have started some book clubs in the prisons, and what those are made up of are groups of about 20 different men in these Northern California book clubs. And today what I wanted to talk to you briefly about is what those book clubs look like, what they entail. I think it's where we do them and the curriculum. And it's a challenging experience, but also well worth it. And we do these at 3 different prisons, and I say we, but actually it's really just me. And I just started having some interns as well. So what I do at these 3 different prisons is we have fundraised, me and the librarians that I partner with, for books, written grants for different for different NGOs within the different prisons, and then we pick different books according on for the different guys what they're interested in, and also different theories. I'm a criminologist by training, so some of them are really interested in mass incarceration, which is what they're experiencing in their own lives. Some of them are interested in masculinity, becoming better men, so we read books on that. Some of them are interested in communication. Some of them are interested in memoirs, history, World War II. We really covered quite the spectrum of books. So throughout our time, what a book club, if you were starting from start to finish, what it might look like is we fundraise for about a year, and what me and the librarian will often do to partner is do all sorts of things for a GoFundMe campaign, and we'll go around to our friends and families. I wrote my own book, and so when I went on a book tour, I would then shamelessly ask people to donate while I was on tour to our prison book club. My interns created a beautiful website, which is my PowerPoint work, so you'll get to see the cover of the website. And so at our first book meeting, what we do is book club members get an introduction to the book. So, for example, we read this incredible graphic novel called The Best We Could Do. Now, this is actually by a New York Times bestseller, and she won multiple awards. And we got copies of this book because I volunteered to be on a committee in which, it looks like you're not going to be able to see this because I think, is there someone still at the desk? Okay, I was hoping you could see it because we made some really beautiful certificates. And the guys were so proud. Anyway, so I joined a committee in which these books then got donated because it was a university book, and tracked down her agent to give the agent the sob story about her book club. And she actually did agree to come. I got to meet her, and she agreed to Zoom into our book club. And so we had this award-winning author who then came into our book club. And so what this program looked like is we started with a brief lecture from me about the historical events that were important in this book. And then the guys had a reading schedule, which was handed out to them with reading comprehension questions. Okay, let's keep it just like this. And if you can go to the next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. These are some of the books that we read, and the book that I'm talking about is the one on the far right. Next slide, please. So this is what a schedule looks like. We have an initial participation lecture, preparation lecture, then this reading schedule that I spoke of. Then we have these reading comprehension questions. And then we have, for those prisons that have part-time librarians, we actually assign one member to be the facilitator of the week, another member to be the timekeeper, and another to be a note taker. And what that does is give some leadership opportunities within the groups. And it also gives me an opportunity to then write about that can be put in their chart and put in their file to say what amazing participation they have in case they go on parole and or go up for parole. And then lastly, we end with discussion questions, and that's when I come in for kind of the book ends of this book club. I live 2 hours away from the prison, so unfortunately I can't go in every week. And there's 3 of these and 2 different prisons in which they go on. Can we go backwards now real quick because we skipped over a couple things? I'd like to, one forward now. Other way. To the rainbow slide. This one. I'd like to conclude, I don't think I have very much time, on why these are important. So, book clubs may seem like a silly thing to have in a prison, but actually they're very, very meaningful. So, some people have been in the book club that I've had for 5 years, and so I've gotten to know them coming back and back for 5 years. Some have come in and this is the first adult book that they've ever read, and they've learned how to read over the course. And some have developed these beautiful relationships. Some have used this as a space to share about child sexual abuse. Some have used it to process trauma. Some have used it as a space to decide that they wanted to write their own first book. It's been a space where they've learned about the history of white supremacy in the US because we read a book about the Ku Klux Klan and had an expert come in and talk about the history because they didn't get to hear about it because our own history isn't, history classes don't talk about that. But these are spaces of personal transformation. But on a larger scale, they're also spaces which research shows reduce violence in prisons, create friendships, increase self-confidence, build skills, and they also create opportunities for additional prison programming. And what I want to just end on is that this created an opportunity in which my book club And my students at the university, I'm a professor at the California State University, Sacramento, read the same book at one point and then started reading the same articles. And when they did that, they then exchanged letters about those books. And it was the first time that my students, who are so used to Instagram and TikTok and email, ever got a handwritten letter. And some of them said that they were going to save that letter. And what was interesting is, and not that interesting to me, but very interesting to my students, they said that the letters they received were so much better than the letters that they wrote. They were much better quality from the Prison Book Club. No surprise to me, because those are the best students I've ever had. But their second letter was so much better quality because they wanted to rise to the occasion of that Prison Book Club and meet the expectations there. And then we had a Zoom meeting about those books and about those shared readings, and that really humanized the experience. And so Prison Book Clubs also opens up the opportunity for a lot of humanity for our students, for connection, and also through the characters of the book as well. So there's lots of opportunities for people to grow. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're also shifting gears a lot. First of all, my name's Alexis Sardina, and I teach in the Division of Criminal Justice at Sac State. And what I'm going to talk to you about is how restorative justice can be used to address sexual violence. So we're talking about essentially two groups that are incredibly stigmatized, often isolated, and often let down by the criminal legal system in a variety of different ways. So the whole first part of my presentation, which you're not going to, so they fear being blamed in some way, so victim blaming behavior. They feel ashamed, they feel embarrassed, they don't want to report.
Can we concentrate a bit? I know we're tired, but please, let's enjoy the time. Thank you.
They also don't want to report because it's usually someone they know that sexually harms them, and they don't necessarily want them to get in trouble. And many people do not want to go through the criminal legal process because that is an incredibly long process. There's no guarantee at the end that there will be a conviction. They usually have very low conviction rates. It can be very, very traumatizing. So researchers in the US actually refer to reporting and courtroom experiences as the second rape because survivors report that as so traumatizing. So this sort of brings us to the why RJ and sexual violence part of all of this. I think it's really important here to acknowledge that both of these parties have justice needs that aren't necessarily met by going through the criminal legal process. So according to a pretty good body of literature, survivors are more interested in a dialogue with attorneys rather than just being told we're having a hearing on this date, show up. They'd like to have a dialogue to understand what the process means and what their options are. They're more interested in prevention efforts and treatment efforts over punishment. They want the opportunity to reconnect with their community. And then the thing that sort of emerges as the most important for many survivors is that they want recognition and acknowledgement of the harm that was done to them by the person that harmed them. And so if you think about the way our criminal legal system is set up, it is not set up for that type of accountability or fear of getting further punishment on the side of the person that's caused harm. There are many justice needs of those who perpetrate sexual harm that are also not met. They need to take accountability and be responsible for their offenses. They need spaces to be vulnerable, to explore the reasons why they committed this crime in the first place. I think it's important to note here that we need to understand the root causes of behavior before we can prevent someone from doing that in the future. And our system doesn't really do anything to address that either. And so I think everybody's sort of covered enough about what restorative justice is here and what sort of the goals of restorative justice are. So I'm breezing through this. And talk to you a little bit about practice and processes. So there are some requirements as I facilitate RJ processes with survivors of sexual harm and those that have caused sexual harm. I'm also a survivor of rape that has gone through a restorative justice process, and I'm also a criminologist. So when I talk about this, it's like wearing 3 hats and taking them off at different times. But when you're preparing 2 parties to meet, you do have to ensure a few things. So of course they have to be willing to participate and somewhat ready. You get them more ready as you meet with them several times. They have to be able to articulate the goals of the process, and those goals can't be further punishment on the person that's caused harm. And then for the people that have caused sexual harm, they have to, of course, be willing and able to name the specific harm without using excuses or justifications, because ultimately that could cause more damage for the survivor. They also need to be able to accept responsibility and make a proper amends. So there are a lot of different processes that sort of fall under the umbrella of restorative justice. Probably the most familiar one to most people would be victim offender dialogue or victim offender mediation. So the 2 parties are prepared by a facilitator, and then sometimes after several months or even a year, they're brought together to have a guided conversation about what happened. I think that's a very, very important process, but I think there's another one that I want to talk about a little bit more because it definitely applies to sex crimes. So this other type of process is referred to as vicarious restorative justice or proxy restorative justice. And this basically involves an individual that has experienced harm, for example, and maybe the person that hurt them passed away, or they don't know the person that harmed them. In those instances, they can be sort of matched up with someone who has perpetrated a similar type of harm, that has gone through restorative processes, that has gone through treatment, sex offense specific treatment, and they can sit in sort of as a proxy for the person that's caused harm. And surprisingly, these are very effective processes, even though the 2 parties don't know each other. So I think that's important when we're talking about sex crimes, especially if we have people who are reluctant to disclose. Sometimes people don't disclose far into adulthood. And so the person that caused them harm is no longer alive, is no longer available, but they should still have the opportunity to participate. So there are some important considerations and caveats here that I'm going to get into in a minute, but a few things about facilitation. So quality training for facilitators in these cases in particular is really, really important. An apprenticeship model is suggested, so 2 facilitators working together in a particular case. But I think the really important part when training people to facilitate these types of cases is for them to sort of almost like have a class in sexual assault, sexual violence, understanding the causes of sexual violence, understanding who perpetrates the offense and who experiences it, because it's really important to have that baseline knowledge of the offense in order to facilitate effectively. So I said, how much time do I have left? 2? Okay, we're gonna be great. So a few concerns. Probably 10 years ago, I never would have been here talking to you about restorative justice and sex crimes because it was so taboo. But there's definitely a shift in which, prosecutors' offices in California are now working with people like me to design programs to offer to survivors that come to them and don't want to go through a court process, but they want to hear the person that harmed them take some accountability and ownership for their actions. But there are, of course, sort of caveats to all of this. So some things to consider are any power dynamics that might be at play. There's definitely an imbalance in power in cases of domestic violence and often in sexual harm, so it's important to be aware of that. Other concerns are related to the fact that researchers have posed these concerns, that if we apply restorative justice to gender-based violence or sexual harm, that the public in general won't take the crimes as seriously. And you know, we hear that a lot, that like RJ is soft on crime, right? It's very hand-holdy and all of that. But my argument would be it's much harder to sit down and look at the person that you hurt in such an intimate way and hear them recount those ways and then be fully accountable. That's much more challenging than sort of being punished by a nameless, faceless system. And the last concern caveat is the amount of time it takes. So as I said earlier, it can take up to a year to prepare both parties to come together for one day, and sometimes those processes extend out further. So, am I getting out of time? Okay. So I'll leave it at that. On my slides, I did have some reflections. If you're interested in reading those, you can find me later and I'll be happy to show them to you. Thank you.
Thank you. May I now invite Professor Ernest Wazi to sit.
Cannot be lost. So in exploring this particular topic, I know it's somewhat sensitive, in many instances even a taboo to talk about it. I usually ask my audience to kind of illustrate that, the point. How many of you men are married? Raise your hand. Okay, thank you for admitting. What would you do as a man if you came home someday and you found your wife in bed with another man? I'm sorry? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you. You raised your hand, you're married, I'm asking this question, you're murmuring. You do what? What would you do as a married man? You came home someday and you see your wife or found your wife in bed with another man. It's her choice. A very liberated man. Who else? Is there a knife in the house? Okay, more violence. What else would you do? I'm sorry? You lock the door, and what happens? Let them continue. All right. Anybody, one more? Yes. You walk out from the house. Okay. Is that somebody has some other earth-shattering response?
I think you should reverse the question.
Reverse the question. Okay. Okay. How many? Okay. How many of you ladies are married? Raise your hand. Okay. Thank you. What would you do if you came home and you find your husband in bed with another man? Okay. Anybody else?
You have 7 minutes.
You just close the door for them. Okay. Another response. Yes. Let me know when they're done. A very understanding wife. All right. Okay. Well, I'm sorry? You ask what I'm doing. Okay. Yes. Thank you. That's very, very important. As human beings, we don't deny our emotions. But one of the things definitely, I know as comical as it may seem, but actually this is real, right? It's very serious stuff. You know, responses that you have given, some have said even much worse. I'll kill, I will do X, Y, or Z. And I have also instances where somebody tries to kill and ends up being killed in the process, right? So you lose out twice at least, right? So domestic violence is very, very real. Can you go to the next slide, please? The different forms, the ones I kind of mentioned, seems to suggest physical kinds of domestic violence. Okay, let's go back to the next one because of time, please. It's a pattern of abuse behavior in any relationship that is used by one another to gain or maintain power and control over another intimate partner. This is from the U.S. Department of Justice. If domestic violence or intimate partner violence is a willful act. And the point that is made in terms of taking a chill, taking a break, coming back, and actually maybe saying, am I in a position to have a conversation about what I have seen or what I have sensed as a guest, and I'm responding or reacting to it, is very, very important. It occurs in the family and many other relationships that we value, we find oftentimes, especially romantic relationships. Next, please. There are several types of domestic violence. In the Nigerian context, maybe sociologically speaking, here, but in the Nigerian context, maybe in terms of the law, what does the law recognize in terms of domestic violence? Sometimes in terms of age. In the US, for example, 12 years and above, either as a victim or an offender, can be labeled domestic violence. Physical oftentimes is the one that tends to get more attention. Sexual abuse, economic or financial abuse, emotional abuse that actually occurs more often than the physical form of abuse. How many of you spouses, those who are married, allow your other spouse to look at your phone or share your password to your phone? Good. And there's some people who say over a dead body, right? And that often has become another point of contention in relationships that can lead to abuse. Spiritual abuse. One of the questions that I asked when I gave this talk some months ago was, shouldn't the husband and the wife be of the same religion? And I gave the example of many leaders whose wife, and they were both the wife and the husband in two different religions, right, in a way. Let's again, kind of the slides, kind of the drawing from our work in terms of the United States. Let's kind of go back to the next slide. Let me give you a couple of cases, given the short time that I have. And the extent of the problem, right? You know, in the United States, oftentimes this is an issue within the Black communities. I'm not saying that solely, but we seem to have a higher report or incidence of domestic violence within the Black community. And it's an extension. The data suggests that in Africa, more women in Africa tend to report higher levels of domestic abuse, especially physical, emotional forms of abuse than other parts of the world. Okay. Next. And it says, well, 51% of African women report that being beaten by the husband for the food burning or some other type of what may be considered to be non-serious matter is okay to do that. We have this also an issue that also we're facing with regard to African immigrants, especially in the United States. There are a couple of cases that I wanted to share with you. Can you scroll up, please? Yeah, keep going. Okay. In terms of the impact, right, we don't need to be labeled at that point. In terms of the safety for the victim, in terms of the family, or for the children, and of course, when all these things happen, friends and network are oftentimes impacted. Who do you hang out with? Who do you stop inviting to parties? How do you regulate where you go for birthdays and anniversaries and so on and so forth? And in many instances, that becomes part of this restorative justice approach that I often talk about. When you have that conversation, that should be part of your conversation. How do you negotiate these various impacts, especially when it concerns friends and family? Next, please. Look at these examples. I'm going to let you quickly to read through these in the interest of time. There's some of the dynamics, especially in context in urban areas and some issues. These are actual cases that we've dealt with through the work of the Center for African Peace and Conflict Resolution, people that we have worked with. In this case, the first one,
on borrowed time.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Next slide. Again, we're looking at it in terms of the cultural dynamics, whether it's in terms of culture, the religion, the family, in terms of why we tend to abide certain behaviors, especially in our new environments or different environments. And of course, there is a certain sense of feminist perspectives that in terms of empowerment, to some extent, human agency, that cannot be overlooked. Let's go back to, I think this is a Nigeria context, right? You know the infamous case, very bad case of domestic violence personality. So what we're suggesting basically, next please. How do you then repair the harm, hold accountability, and be able to create a reintegrated process? The typical victim of domestic violence wants the violence to stop, not necessarily the relationship. The wife wants the husband to stop beating her, not necessarily the end of the marriage. Are you with me? The same also will be applicable in terms of, I'm not suggesting that only wives are the victims of domestic violence, because men are also, whatever that relationship is how do you create a level type of discussion or conversation, a respectful approach